This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hey everyone, a quick message from me, the founder of the Voice of Early Childhood. I wanted to thank you all for listening and tuning into the podcast. We're always ensuring we provide valuable content for our listeners and viewers as we share diverse voices from across the early childhood community. And we're always encouraging you all to share your voice too. So if you have a specific topic in mind or a guest you'd like to hear from, let us know. Just fill in the contact us form via the link in this episode description. And if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on. This helps us to keep sharing voices and thought-provoking content. Thank you all for being part of the Voice of Early Childhood community. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Solitska. I'm your host. And today we are talking about advocating for 2-year-olds, rethinking provision, collaboration and quality in early years education. And I'm joined by Cassie Holland. Thank you very much, Cassie, for joining on this episode.
Oh, hi, Angelica. Thanks so much for having me here. Very excited to speak about 2-year-olds.
Yeah, it's really great to have you on because what I think I'm going to kind of start off with is telling all the listeners and viewers the fact that Cassie could actually potentially bring us some balance on this topic of 2-year-olds in schools. It is a very complex topic right now here in England, and Cassie's going to tell us a little bit more about that now. But her unique position means that she's working within and with private settings and with local authorities and schools, as well as a birth to 3 local specialist leader and nursery manager in Bristol. So she'll tell us a little bit more about that, I'm sure. So yeah, Cassie, I think it'd be great to firstly, I guess, introduce yourself a little bit more. I just kind of gave a brief overview there. But also, before we really start digging deeper into this topic, please can you set the scene for those listeners who may not be up to date with the early years context in England right now, maybe those listening, internationally. Why are we talking about 2-year-olds right now more than ever?
Oh, fab, thank you. Yeah, so much to say. I'm not sure quite how we're going to keep this to time, so I'll try and be as concise as I can. So, hi everyone, I'm Cassie, and I have a multitude of hats in early years. I've been working in early years since 2010. Started off as a key person in the 2-year-old room. So, 2-year-olds really do kind of hold a very special place in my heart. And I'm currently now working as a manager at Archfield House Nursery in Bristol 2 days a week, and I'm also a birth to 3 local specialist leader for Bristol Early Years Teaching Hub, and a birth to 3 network leader for Bristol and Beyond Stronger Practice Hub, who are responsible for the North and the Southwest 8 local authorities. So I'm really privileged to work with many, many different settings. Obviously, PVI is right in the middle of my heart, as I've been working at Archfield for coming up to, I think, 14 or 15 years it may be this year. So a long, long time. But also that I get the opportunity to run networks in Bristol and other local authorities with 2-year-olds and with baby educators. So all to do with birth to 3. So I am really lucky to be able to kind of get to see and hear from a multitude of educators and kind of academics from all over, as I'm also studying towards my master's degree at Spa. So lots going on at the moment, but not reflecting exactly how much is going on for the early years sector right now in England. So for anyone that doesn't know or hasn't heard, it would be surprising if you haven't, because there's been lots of talk about it kind of within society on the news, and actually early years feels like it's been out and about there more than ever before at the moment. So the Department for Education decided that they would be advocating for more school-based nursery provision for 2-year-olds, and that they would be opening that up in the plan of the kind of rollout of the extension of the 15 and therefore nearly 30 hours funding for working families, because capacity has been an issue within the early years sector. That the Department for Education have chosen that school-based nurseries is the way forward, and I think they say it plays at the heart of their plan in terms of the future of early years provision. So this has been quite controversial, actually, in terms of our sector and thinking about 2-year-olds and where the best place is for 2-year-olds and what caring and educating for with 2-year-olds is all about. And it's provoked lots of thinking and lots of conflict, actually. So from within the kind of PVI sector, there's been lots of talk around the kind of appropriateness of schools, and also the kind of understanding and experience and knowledge around working with 2-year-olds, and just how different that is in comparison to preschool. And obviously then thinking that some schools may just have reception classes at the moment, and will be thinking about opening their early years provision up to preschool and 2-year-olds. So there's been a lot of discussion around this, and I think it's really wonderful that I'm here today to be able to think a little bit more about the complexities of it and what we do now that this plan is in place, because the Department of Education have just announced the first 300 schools that are receiving capital grant funding to support setting up provision for 2-year-olds. So there's been a lot of conversation recently about that and what that's going to look like, and moving forward, what's happening in terms of early years in England.
And you talk about one of the big concerns in your article, which is fantastic, by the way. So I'm really kind of urging all the listeners and viewers to take a look at that as well. But yes, Cassie, you talk about the schoolification of early years, which is it's not a new topic. Definitely not. It's been, something that we've been talking about, especially, I guess, in academia, actually, for quite a while. And, it kind of comes and goes. But really right now it's a big issue. So tell us a little bit more about that side of things, and maybe kind of define schoolification for those who may have not really heard of that term before. I don't think it's as common as we may think in some circles.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, to me, schoolification means about, that kind of rush toward academicness, not a word at all, but that academic lens of childhood, and about pushing our children into that school-based scenario quicker than ever, in terms of that's my understanding in thinking about that schoolification. Not to say that all schools and all school-based nurseries are kind of building into that narrative. I have seen some absolutely fantastic school-based nursery provision for 2-year-olds, where the environments are fantastic, the relationships, the key person system is amazing. I've seen that happen in practice. It is happening now across the country, and there are examples of fantastic practice out there in schools. But as we talk more and more about schools and about school readiness, and think about 2-year-olds in schools, a lot of what I'm hearing from educators from all different types of settings within early years is that there is this worry: is it appropriate for 2-year-olds to be in school? And that kind of goes with that schoolification narrative of schools being the kind of sit down, being taught, not having as much play, and even the kind of quality of play that is happening and how often that's happening within schools in England is really contested at the moment anyway. This also goes alongside the current government kind of pushing this good level of development in terms of reception and thinking about school and the transition to school. So that's also posing lots of questions for us in the early years sectors, for us to really reflect upon and wonder where we're at and what our expectations are. As an early years sector, are our expectations the same as the school sector in terms of starting school? And there's been that new, it's not called school readiness, is it? There's the new report, I can't quite remember the name of it, but that they've released a kind of big document and website about getting ready for starting reception, I think it's called. So slightly different language, which is very welcomed, in my opinion, in terms of moving away from that idea of school readiness. And we could talk about that for a whole podcast in itself. But it builds on to the narrative and thinking about, 2-year-olds in school at the same time as us talking about children currently supposedly not being ready for school, and posing that question of, actually, are the schools not ready for the children, and post-COVID? And there's so much that you could talk about there and discuss, and people would have really different opinions on. I think that's the tricky thing about talking about this topic, is that everyone will have their own opinions, and quite rightly, based on their own experience and their own reflexivity and who they are as people, as educators, their experiences in different types of setting. But I think it's the perfect excuse and reason for us to have these bigger discussions and reflect upon actually bringing it back to the 2-year-olds and thinking that this is happening. The government are putting this into place. And so what are we going to do, and how are we going to respond as an early years community to really give those 2-year-olds the best outcomes in terms of their well-being, mental health, and learning and development within that, from the settings they're attending.
And yes, it's definitely important to have these conversations, especially as, right now there are big concerns, debates from a lot of people across the early years sector. And I think your point on are schools ready for 2-year-olds is something that is really important to discuss, because this is happening. 2-year-olds are in schools already, and more of them are going to be in schools from September. So we just need to address this in terms of how do we best provide the learning and development experiences for these children. So I guess from your experience and opinion, and your reading, let's start to kind of discuss what is how can schools be ready, I guess, and within this, what is a good environment for 2-year-olds? What does that look like, both physically and emotionally, in terms of the adults as well? Because I know that's something you write about in your article when you question, so where is the best place for 2-year-olds?
It's so interesting because I think the tricky thing is when you're talking about working with 2-year-olds as a subject, it underpins everything. So those pillars of pedagogy, the interactions, the environment, the working with families, the working with other sectors, everything about our pedagogy is what you need to reflect upon to think about that.
Yeah.
So high quality environment for 2-year-olds. So it makes it really challenging to be concise in delivering what that looks like, because it's so complex and so complicated. So I like to talk about the adults first, because in my opinion and from my experience, those adults are the people that make the biggest difference. Knowledgeable adults who know about 2-year-olds, know about where they're at, where they've been, where they're at now, and where they might be going, and where you're going to kind of having that journey together, and how to support that 2-year-old to be the most open and really have that sense of belonging and feeling like they have a place and a home in that setting, is the adults. It's all about the adults. You can have environments that are outstanding, world renowned, but actually if you don't have the appropriate adults who have that level of understanding and wanting to be there and support those 2-year-olds, then that environment isn't going to be the best thing. They need the people, and they need those loving relationships, still with a very kind of heavily linked to their key people, and thinking about how that relationship underpins everything you do within the environment. And you mentioned earlier about that physical and emotional environments in terms of separating those and being able to see that within practice. And that's really visible, isn't it? When you visit a setting with 2-year-olds, you can see when the adults are down and at their level and have really kind of open, loving communication, and there's laughter and there's lots of kind of exciting activities and play happening, sometimes with, sometimes without adults, that kind of sense of safety and security comes from those people and those attachments that are there. So I think the biggest thing for us to unpick is about that level of knowledge and how we support educators working in schools and also in PVI sectors working with 2-year-olds to have some continual professional development, networking opportunities, and experiences to be able to go and visit other places and to be able to talk about what being 2-year-old looks like, and what words you'd use to describe being a 2-year-old. And as an educator working with 2-year-old, how do we understand play, and how do we understand our relationship with families? So one of the kind of barriers in terms of my experience and thinking about talking to other educators is the difference with schools is that kind of drop off at the door. So yes. in lots of PVI settings, some settings still haven't post-COVID gone back to having parents and carers in at parting and reuniting, that beginning and the end of the day. And we know that a big worry for us might be that aspect. That's only a few minutes of a day in terms of thinking about school-based nursery provision or PVI provision. But it's a huge implication in terms of how we're approaching relationships and having families feel like they belong and have a kind of stakeholders. We're a service, aren't we? Regardless of whether we're a private setting, an independent setting, charity-based, school-based nursery, whatever our kind of sector it is, we all have a responsibility in our services to the children, those 2-year-olds and their families. So thinking about the environment and the adults in that role and having the flexibility to be able to say within their school environment, oh no, this is a really important part of our pedagogy. We need those families to be able to come in during their settling and during their parting and reuniting. That's a big part of what's important to us. But we need to be able to have the kind of confidence, don't we, professional confidence to do that. So I think a lot of what we can be doing together as a sector right now is responding to some quite tricky things. There's a lot going on right now in terms of early years, and I could speak for a long time even just about the barriers and tricky things we're facing at the moment. But working together to be able to unpick those things and figure out how that might work in different settings and share our expertise and knowledge about 2-year-olds is really important, because 2-year-olds are 2-year-olds no matter where they are. They are going to be the same in a PVI to a school, and that's why we need to think about those 2-year-olds and unpick what it looks like in terms of that high quality practice. And obviously quality is really debated anyway, isn't it, as a concept?
Sure, yeah.
How you are the people to who says what quality is and what isn't, and again, a different podcast topic, I'm sure. But yeah. I think for me the biggest thing for us to think about is the adults and who's caring for these 2-year-olds and educating them and being with them and celebrating them, and how we support each other as educators doing that.
And there's definitely a lot there, and you talk about in your article as well, around collaboration and making sure that, so firstly, I guess the educators being knowledgeable and suitable and, like you say, loving and caring towards the 2-year-olds. And not to say that any other practitioners or teachers are not kind of caring and loving, but actually it's that approach that is, I guess, a little what we talk about more recently in early years, a little bit more nurturing, and that's what those 2-year-olds need. So having that either experience and, well, both experience and the CPD to go with that, and constantly being up to date with research, I think that's so vital. And I heard someone recently talk about the fact that we need to really focus on those 2-year-olds, because it's not just about diluted preschool or reception practice. And I think that's what people think might become the issue, unfortunately, of some people thinking, actually, who may not understand early years so well, actually, we're doing everything with these younger children in reception. Let's just replicate that and make things a little bit simpler, let's say, and maybe not put so much phonics and maths emphasis and things like that, and add a little bit more, a few more play-based resources and things like that. Whereas actually, there's so much more to it, like you just started mentioning about so many things there. So I think that is a big worry, the lack of perhaps knowledge around what 2-year-olds need from potentially senior leadership teams. I think that's what a lot of practitioners, teachers, early years teachers or professionals might be experiencing. And hence why I think you said, that professional confidence is really vital. And I guess it's you've got to believe in that pedagogy, and you have got to step out of your comfort zone to advocate for it. And I know you mentioned advocacy and advocating in your article as well, and that's really, really vital, especially at times like this where there are so many, like you say, challenges in the sector.
Yeah, there is a lot going on, and I think being an advocate for early years in general is one thing, and being able to kind of really understand yourself, what you believe is really important, and your values as an educator, and being able to advocate for them within your room or within your setting or within your kind of local authority, or when Ofsted visit you, or there's different levels, aren't there? So there's that. Then there might be, if you're working with 2-year-olds and you're in a room with lots of 2-year-olds, or you're a room leader, it might be that you really need to advocate for the 2-year-olds in your setting, whether it's a school or a PVI setting. And like with my birth to 3 hat on, historically, sometimes preschool gets the kind of maybe that slight more attention in some settings. A lot of setting leaders have started in preschool settings, or have worked in preschool or with those older age groups. And specifically within the kind of baby room, that level of understanding and knowledge and sometimes isn't as heavy in there. And that means that baby room educators or those working with 2-year-olds do need to understand what their 2-year-olds really need to be able to advocate for them and, act in their best interest. I think that idea of kind of ethical pedagogy and really being aware of our own moral stances in all aspects of our jobs is really, really important. And especially when working with our kind of youngest children, that we are able to articulate that and talk to each other and unpick that so that then we can kind of go outwards and say, as a sector or kind of a part of the sector, to say, oh no, we know this is really important and we agree upon this. And we know that we want to support these school-based nurseries by advocating for those 2-year-olds and letting you know that we think these things really work for us in practice. One way to do that is by understanding from each other and giving opportunities rather than that kind of competitive nature that can sometimes feel, really conflicting and creating barriers amongst settings, sometimes neighbouring streets or on the same street or, within real immediate locality and don't know each other at all, which I think is just a real shame for thinking about those 2-year-olds and about the practice and what they could be sharing with each other.
Yes, definitely. And this reminds me of when you write in your article around the fact that we are kind of more at risk at the moment with so many challenges of being more of a fragmented sector and then having more of that divide between us, the different settings, different provisions. So it's really important, like as you've mentioned several times there, to really look at this from that collaborative standpoint and, as you say, learn from each other. So I know you mentioned in your article ways in which we can collaborate. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that now and expand on some of those points? Because I think sometimes, we talk about collaboration, but then it's difficult for settings to think, okay, but how do I do that practically? Especially, with day-to-day being so busy, but what it's like being a nursery manager.
Yeah, and I definitely know how hard it is to allow yourself time to be able to have your own continual professional development or for any kind of early years managers out there now, I applaud you if you're scheduling in time for your own continual professional development, because I know definitely that I in previous years have not been able to do that or not kind of made that time for myself because the list is so endless before you even think about the challenges that we're facing in the sector at the moment. So I think that collaboration can come in many different ways. I think that social media and WhatsApp groups and that kind of thing is a fantastic thing for us at the moment in terms of us being able to communicate with each other and share celebrations of practice and being able to kind of really reflect on each other. So, in Bristol, we've got an early years managers group where we kind of connect and talk about things that are coming up and being able to share and collaborate. But there are kind of ways thinking about those particularly working with 2-year-olds. So every local authority is very, very different. From Stronger Practice Hub, I've learned that very, very quickly, that every local authority is very different. And, especially for settings that have multiple settings crossing different local authorities, that can be really tricky for them in terms of continual professional development and networking, because they might have 2 settings that are actually only 5 minutes away from each other, accessing completely different local authority offers in terms of their continual professional development and networking opportunities. So I guess what I would say is reach out to your Stronger Practice Hub, because they're funded until the end of March 2026. And one of their key roles is about identifying and supporting networks that already exist or creating networks for different groups of educators. Similarly to local authorities, different Stronger Practice Hubs have approached that in very different ways. There's 18 in England, so all very different and have very different kind of ideas of those networks and how they're working. But for example, within Bristol and beyond Stronger Practice Hub, we have some 2-year-old network meetings. So some of those are face-to-face. So in Bristol, they are 6 meetings a year where we go and visit different settings. So we have a different host setting every meeting, and we invite everybody that's working with 2-year-olds in Bristol, whether they be childminders, nursery settings, preschools, school-based nurseries, anybody working with 2-year-olds. And we spend the time looking at the provision, and then we have an opportunity for networks, sometimes with a bit of a theme. So, for example, sleep has been coming up quite a lot recently, in respectful sleep spaces and mindful care, because these are lots of the things that we need to think about with 2-year-olds. And that's the kind of difference, like you were saying, Angelica, in terms of not just watering down reception or preschool provision, that actually huge parts of a 2-year-old's day will be in kind of careful interaction. mindful care is really important. So within our networks, that too, the sleep provision has been coming up a lot. So we might then talk about how people kind of overcome barriers of sleep, and talking about families with sleep and how we create those respectable sleep spaces, etc. So then we have those opportunities to talk, and it creates this network. So quite often we have a lot of the same people coming back to each network across the city to be able to visit. Some local authorities just can't work like that location-wise. There's too much going on. So there are some local authorities that have networks and some stronger practice hubs that create online networks for educators. So at the moment, we're doing some baby ones in different local authorities where we meet online. We have sometimes up to like 40 baby room educators there. And we break off into rooms and have opportunities to just talk about what's going on for us, what we want to celebrate, what the kind of barriers are to practice. And I think, in Bristol, it's been going on for years and years and years and years. So I've joined as a local specialist leader in the past I think maybe 3 years. And supported running those networks, but they've been going on for a long time, and really having that opportunity to think and stop and reflect, because we're rushing so much of the time. Yes, like sure. I was saying, in terms of building in CPD time for your own sakes, if you're a manager or a leader, but actually that rushness, sometimes we're doing ourselves as well, aren't we? It's not just that we're rushing children, we're rushing ourselves, because there's always something to be done on the to-do list. But actually just trying to kind of take a leaf out of Madison Clark's slow pedagogy, not just with the children, but ourselves as well, and allow definitely time. So one of my colleagues at the Bristol Early Years Teaching Hub, Lucy, really advocates for time to think. I don't know if you've read or heard Nancy Klein's book called Time to Think. And it's a fantastic way for us to think about us allowing ourselves the time and really being able to pay tribute to how important thinking time is. And so those networks really, really support that and give educators time to stop, talk about the 2-year-olds that they have right now, because each cohort is so different. And post-COVID, parenting has changed so much. Life has changed so much. Educators have changed, different generations. There's so complex to be leading in 2-year-old provision, whether you're a room leader or not. Everybody's leading, aren't they, in some respect, because you're working with children. You have that ability to lead and advocate and respond to the children there and then. So in terms of opportunities for collaborating, those networks are a fantastic resource. So reaching out to local authorities or stronger practice hubs and say, what's going on in my area right now, is a really great way to start. If there isn't something for you as a 2-year-old educator, then why don't you just reach out to some of the settings local to you? Or it might be that somebody that you used to work with works somewhere else across the city or across the town now, and you're able to just ping them an email and say, look, can we just come and have a look around? Or you might arrange to have a Zoom meeting every now and again just to talk about what's going on. Or it might be that you have a team meeting and that you arrange to have your team meeting with one of your fellow chain nurseries that you don't actually get to see very often or talk to, so that meeting's together, so you can unpick and have time to reflect. And that's something that we've been doing at Archfield, that we have 2 settings, and actually sometimes even we can't access the networks with everywhere else, with life and everything that's going on. So we've also started doing it within our 2 settings and bringing the 2 teams that work with the babies or with the 2-year-olds to come together and just reflect upon their provision and what kind of challenges they're facing at the moment. Because those networks really give you the opportunity to unpick what's going on, but also the whole time you're reflecting upon yourself and about those values and that ethical pedagogy, and questioning what's really important for you and what you really need to stand by to protect and advocate for those 2-year-olds in terms of the best provision for them. So I think it's possible to do that even if your stronger practice hub or local authority aren't providing that opportunity for you. So some examples not related to any of that. We've had some settings who have reached out to say on their inset days, if you're lucky enough to have inset days, that some settings have been sending small groups of their team to go and look at provision across, in their local areas. And then in the afternoon, coming back and feeding back everything that they'd seen and what they thought about and what it made them think about their pedagogy and about what they were doing, and just trying to understand. So not necessarily replicating in any way. So not in terms of high quality or best practice saying, oh, well, they do this, 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 and this, so we're going to do that, because that's not about your children or your families. But being able to bring that back and say it was really interesting that they spoke about this way that they work with families, or that during their drop off, they're parting in the morning, that they're really reflecting upon this, or, they're finding this hard too. Even that puts you in a better place to be able to try and overcome those barriers, and provide the best possible environment for the 2-year-olds in your care. So yeah, I really do advocate myself for creating those opportunities for networks. And I think it's interesting because from a PBI manager perspective, I remember back in the day, way back when I first started, that we were really competitive with our local settings. It was competing for children, so say, and that made that tricky for us to be able to connect and be able to go and see. I never would have thought about ringing a setting down the road and saying, oh, well, can I come and have a look around? Because I'd be worried about what that would look like or what would be kind of interpreted. But actually, as we kind of reach out and these opportunities arise, it teaches you that actually, my gosh, we could be learning so much, and that I could be sharing things. And rather than us all writing the same updates to policies, or reflecting upon the same thing, or all reading the same millions of books and articles and all the information that's available to us now, actually we could share that kind of reflection time and that responsibility with each other, and being able to kind of support each other through that for our own well-being, own learning and continual professional development ourselves, but also then about the main thing being about thinking about the 2-year-olds and what they're needing.
Yeah, and I definitely advocate so much for collaboration. Obviously, that's the big point of the Voice of Early Childhood, and I think it's just so great to see that change. Like you said before, it was all very much around the competitive nature of the sector, and yes, now even now in some situations that is still the case. I think maybe it's natural because whatever setting you have, like you said earlier, if it's a charity or a private setting, they're still businesses as such. They still need to make sure that they have the numbers. So yeah, it's really vital to be able to reach out. And I know that a lot of people that I've spoken to before and the events that I go to, I always take so much from the connections I make. So and I'm not even working in settings anymore. So I think there's so much value that you could take you can learn from anyone. It doesn't have to be that the setting is, in quotations, better than yours in any kind of way. There's so many things that we can learn from each other. And I think it's great that you'd mentioned kind of inset days as well, and visiting each other's settings. And I guess also another thing is kind of sharing CPD as well. If you're having someone come in, like an external speaker, then you can you can have a joint CPD day or afternoon or evening, whatever it might be. I think that's a really great kind of cost-effective way as well of CPD and bringing that collaboration in. So yeah, I think there's definitely so much value in collaborating, and I really love that in your article as well. You've got some really great kind of points for considerations for settings. I think I'll read a couple of them out because I think it's really great for people to hear, and then they can read the rest on the article. So things like, who are the champions advocating for 2-year-olds at your setting or school? How do relationships underpin all aspects of pedagogy? Confident leadership is vital. So kind of thinking about that as well. So getting us to really reflect. And when you were talking about visiting each other's settings and thinking, not just taking something away and kind of replicating, but thinking about, is this suitable for our children, our families, our communities? That really reminded me of the fact that we need to be both kind of as leaders, as anyone kind of taking any information in, we need to be really critical reflectors, and really make sure that any information that we take away from anyone else, we need to reflect on how is this looking like for our setting. So that really kind of reminded me of what I often talk about, being critical consumers. So that's so vital to always have that in your mind when you're going and visiting, and it's not just thinking, oh, we're better than them, or almost feeling disheartened and being like, oh wow, they're so amazing, we're never going to be able to have anything like this because of our budget or something like that. Actually, it's just thinking, okay, so how can we love this, how can we replicate this in a way that is practical, cost effective, and in a way that supports our 2-year-olds in our setting. And another one that you've got, how do you celebrate all 2-year-olds and their families and embracing them, embracing what makes them them. I really love that. And have you considered the emotional environment? So there's so much there, and I think it's so great that you've provided all these kind of reflective opportunities, and that's what we need to be doing, whatever setting we're in, whether it's in a school or, like you mentioned earlier, if you are in a PVI setting. I think this is giving everyone dare I say, we're taking something positive out of this challenging situation, but it's given us all an opportunity to reflect on our practice with 2-year-olds wherever we are, even if we're not in the school. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's the tricky thing, even with, being able to try and write anything about 2-year-olds is really, really challenging, because it's so many aspects to cover and so many things to think about. We were putting together some kind of bits in terms of response. I think we're going to put the link to it in the further reading. In Bristol, about school-based nurseries, and kind of thinking about where to begin and building on the amazing kind of resources that are out there already. And we were saying, how do we not write a book? Because so much to cover. And there are some absolutely fantastic books out there that you can either maybe get from libraries, or if any of your educators are studying at universities or colleges, etc., then their libraries might be able to loan them as well. Or again, reach out to friends and colleagues in other settings and say, have you got this book? Or you might choose to have a lending library together, or there is a fantastic amount of information out there, and I've put lots of links to some of the reading and the books that I've really enjoyed recently in the further reading link on the article, because I think that is something that really helps us, is being able to look at that and go back to something and think, oh, actually, okay, well, let's think about our provision, our children, our families, because even though 2-year-olds are 2-year-olds, no matter what setting they're in, our demographics and our families will be really, really different. And so what we need to provide and what that looks like will be different. That idea of wise practice rather than best fit in terms of copying things, but really thinking deeply about what's right for our children and our families is really important. And I think I put it in the article, but I think one of the main things to reflect upon, if you're a school-based nursery or PVI setting now, thinking about with this expansion of the funding, so not just about the school-based nurseries, but about the kind of rollout of the 30 hours, is to really reflect upon those families or children that are receiving this, so say disadvantaged funding. I don't like the word. I know it's a bit debatable, isn't it, in itself, even that being labelled as that. But for those families, making sure that they are receiving the care and education and are being prioritised in terms of that working families, because as more working families become able to receive that funding, it's less likely that potentially there'll be spaces available there and then, because they're going to get booked up so quickly because there's a need for spaces. And Julian Grenier, I think, again, I put a link to in the further reading, thinking about that balance in our moral and ethical pedagogy with the 2-year-olds, and making sure that we are providing a fantastic care and learning opportunities and environment for all children and families, and making sure that that's kind of equitable to their needs, as opposed to a kind of one size fits all delivery, which early years just isn't. And that's the beauty of it. That's why so many of us come into early years as opposed to going into schools, is that we've always wanted that flexibility and autonomy to be able to be different and celebrate our differences and similarities within different settings, because of our families and because of our demographics and our staff team and who we are as people and our kind of micro communities. So lots to think about, but I really appreciate the us beginning even this discussion, and hopefully lots of people will reach out and be able to talk about their experiences of 2-year-olds and what they think is really important, so that we can kind of have that joint narrative, so that we can then make sure that we advocate and really kind of are those, political advocates as well, getting ourselves out there and speaking to the Department of Education and Ofsted and Early Years Alliance are doing a fantastic job at really helping us to be kind of visible and have their say in all of the kind of press coverage of all sorts that's
Mm.
been going on over the past couple of weeks and months. So getting out there and doing our best, I guess, and trying to be as positive in some really, really challenging circumstances right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think the big takeaway really from your article and this podcast episode, Cassie, is about how can we collaborate and share this knowledge and experience to best support 2-year-olds in whichever setting you're working in. So I hope that those who are listening and watching, reading the article will really start to think about those things of, the power of collaboration, like you mentioned there, in terms of advocacy as well, but really sharing that knowledge. I think it will really help to reframe some of the difficult kind of situations that early years has kind of been placed into, and different settings, schools and PBI settings have been kind of put into at the moment. Thank you, Cassie, for sharing your knowledge and experience. It's been really great to hear from you.
Thank you so much.
So for everyone, again, listening, Cassie's article is on the Voice of Early Childhood website. There's lots of detail there and a really extensive reading list to take a look at, as Cassie mentioned. And actually, just to mention as well, so Cassie shared the Bristol Early Years guidance document. So there's 2 there, and they're really fantastic. They're great downloads. I can see there's one all about 2s setting guidance, and then Ready for 2s school guidance as well. And that, look, I've had a flick through them already, and they look really useful, really fantastic. Not just kind of either the theory or the practice side, but really bringing them both in and allowing for those deeper reflections and considerations. So what I will do is anyone who is already a subscriber will just pop the links directly into the newsletter, so you can just easily be able to download those. And anyone who's not subscribed to the newsletter already, I'll pop a link into this episode description so you can just access them right in your emails. So then you can share them with other settings. So that's going to be really, really useful. And like I said as well, as Cassie said, lots of reading material there as well. And then finally, this episode also reminded me of Charlotte Norman's article and podcast episode. And she's an early years leader in a primary school. And she discussed this, I think this might have been this time last year, discusses her work around provision for 2-year-olds as part of the Education Durham Early Years Curriculum project. And she actually mentioned the struggles she had initially around kind of overly formalized practice, and then talking about how the project allowed her to speak with other leaders and teachers who also were implementing 2-year-old provision, and really unpick what makes that meaningful curriculum and what constitutes as appropriate practice and pedagogy for that age phase. So kind of really reminded me of what you were talking about there as well, Cassie. So for anyone who's listening, you might also find it interesting to take a look at that one as well. And the link is in this episode description as well. So there's more and more reading around 2-year-olds, as Cassie mentioned, and that's so important. But the main thing is read kind of anything that you consume. Make sure you consume it from that kind of critical, reflective lens, I would say, and think, just as Cassie said, make sure that you're thinking about how does it apply to my setting, my children, my community, and then share it with other people, share your reflections. So hopefully we will hear lots after this episode on how you're supporting your 2-year-olds wherever you are, or maybe things on, your thoughts around how you think we could navigate the challenges. So yeah, definitely always open to hearing everyone's voices. So finally, once again, Cassie, thank you so much. It's really, really great that you came on and addressed this issue, because I know it's something that a lot of people are speaking about, and it is a difficult topic. So I really value that. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing from people. Please do reach out, because I think beginning of a conversation rather than an end, for sure. There's lots more to be said.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you said that. Definitely the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah.